I will now hand over to Ginny East from Odiham Cottage Hospital. Ginny.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the work of Odiham Cottage Hospital. For those of you who don't know much about us, here we are, tucked behind the church and in between Berryfield Infants and Mayhill Junior School in Odiham. We've been there for over 100 years. That's the earliest photo I can find of the hospital. We are built on land that was bequeathed by Dr. John McIntyre, who was the senior partner of the Odiham Health Centre. At that time, he was fed up of putting his patients on the back of a horse and cart and sending them off to Winchester Hospital, whereupon they were invariably dead on arrival. So he left us a sum of money in his estate, and Odiham Consolidated Charities, who own the almshouses next door, gave the piece of land on which the building was made. And you can see that it took a few years before the first patients arrived, but when they did, they were run under the local community arrangements, whereby people had to pay for their care until the NHS came along in 1948, as we're all familiar with. The hospital, even from those early days, 1955, was very much supported by the community, with the League of Friends being formed at that time. So the hospital was run by the NHS very successfully for something like 50, 60 years. But in 1998, there was a plan to close the Cottage Hospital, and many of you may remember there was a very active campaign to save the hospital from closure. The campaign had 3 phases. First of all, we had to raise money to purchase the freehold and raise £250,000 in 3 months. The hospital had been neglected for some years, so there was a complete refurbishment of all of the premises, and that actually meant that the hospital was closed for 6 months, and the patients were moved to Alton Community Hospital for that time. And then the third stage of that agreement was that Odiham Cottage Hospital charity would subsidise the cost of care, making it a very attractive proposition financially for the NHS. And all of that money on an ongoing basis, which was something like £90,000 per year, was raised by the community through a whole variety of fundraising campaigns, regular donations, firms, clubs, everybody chipped in. It really was a marvellous event. In 2010, we celebrated our centenary with Dame Mary Fagan there, our patron, visiting. We had a lovely afternoon on the local school fields with the school choir, great cake. And the 3 people that you see at the bottom on the right-hand side, that's my favourite photograph. The chap in the middle is actually a direct descendant from Dr. John McIntyre, his great-great-grand-nephew, and he travelled all the way from Australia to be with us on that day. And the couple either side of him are direct descendants of Lord and Lady Peter, who were the local dignitaries who actually opened the hospital in 1910. So that was really quite a nice touch. But unfortunately, within a year, the NHS announced the withdrawal of nursing services, which effectively meant that the beds at the Cottage Hospital were going to have to close. Despite an active community campaign, there was no going back this time. The NHS was resolute in their decision to close the Cottage Hospital. And in many ways, that was a reflection of their desire to move towards care in the community. They didn't want people sitting around in beds any longer. People had a desire to be treated in their own homes, and the NHS were keen to enhance community services and care for people in their own homes. So the trustees of the Cottage Hospital set about deciding, what are we going to do? What is needed locally? Where are the gaps? We had a number of assets. We had a fundraising stream of 3 charity shops in Odiham, Old Basing and Hartley Witney. We had a pile of money that had been steadily built through our endowment fund. We had a building and we had a brand. And it was very much thought that with all of these things together, plus the goodwill of the community, that we ought to be able to make something happen. So having had a consultation with the community, we came up with a model whereby we would work in partnership with various accredited providers of local services. And our initial model of working was with the NHS, Heart Voluntary Action, Age Concerned Hampshire and St Michael's Hospice. They were our founding partners. And each of those 4 bodies were contracted with us to provide services either here in the hospital or out in the community. And I can talk through a range exactly what those services are. Since that time, we've added a whole variety of other partners and other services to offer quite a widespread range of services to local people in need. So what I'm going to describe now is the services that were in place prior to COVID, because necessarily there have been some changes to those services. Wherever possible, we have continued things, but it may not be in person. It may have to have been virtually, but I can talk through those. So we have NHS community services at the hospital. Specialist outreach clinics come here regularly with a variety of other clinics. And we had iTalk, which is the NHS psychological counselling services for people with mild to moderate anxiety, depression services. So although initially that service is a telephone service, if people have felt that they are needed would benefit from a one-to-one, face-to-face clinic appointment, then they can come to Odiham Cottage Hospital for that. And the other thing that we more recently have started, well, actually, having said that, was 2014, was to establish the link nurses at Whitewater Health, serving Hook and Hartley Witney. Got a little bit more about that. Hook and Hartley Witney GPs approached us because they recognised that there was an increasing number of housebound elderly patients who were missing out on the specialist services at the GP centres. Those patients have understandably a high incidence of needing emergency admissions to acute hospitals, which isn't in anyone's benefit at all. So together with Whitewater, we funded a 2-year pilot project, which basically demonstrated the benefits of putting in proactive preventative nursing care to support patients against a control group. And we were able to demonstrate that the number of emergency admissions to hospital went down. There was an increase in well-being and a whole range of other benefits to GPs, for example, who weren't needed to be giving so much input to these people. And that evidence was published in the Journal of Integrated Care and has actually led to the CCG giving some funds to establishing the role in a wider context, which is marvellous news. So the role at Whitewater is now a permanent role, and the Cottage Hospital continue to fund at 50%, and Odiham Health Centre are now examining a similar role for their own patients. So one of the other founding partners was Age Concerned Hampshire. They provide a range of services here. The Rosefield Day Centre is the heart and soul, if you like, of the hospital, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there are other things going on here, podiatry clinics. The village agents had a base here, and they were running silver surfing classes, IT classes for people who want a bit of extra help and support, and very successfully the Steady and Strong classes. The people come and have exercises with a physiotherapist. The Rosefield Health and Wellbeing Centre is actually a very exciting day today for us, because having been closed since March 2020, we are finally reopening on Tuesday. So the place is a hive of activity, which is lovely, as we prepare for our reopening on Tuesday, and we will, in the short term at least, be running 5 days a week, because there have been four other centres in the northeast of Hampshire that Age Concerned Hampshire run, which have had to close on a permanent basis. They've actually lost their facilities. So some of those clients are being brought to Odiham Cottage Hospital until other facilities can be arranged for them. It's a totally COVID secure environment. People will be in pods. We've got all the distancing, the cleaning, everything is in place now, and we're quite convinced that we can provide safe care, but at the same time have fun and have a welcoming environment for people to come back to. That's what's happening here and now. The other bit of news is that we have run for a number of years now a befriending service in partnership with St Michael's Hospice. They were very keen to set up a befriending service and worked with us to start one off in West Hart. But more recently, they've reviewed their strategic aims, and coincidentally, a befriending service has been established at North Hampshire Hospital. So they felt that this wasn't something that they needed to continue with themselves. But the trustees of this hospital were very convinced in the benefits of befriending. And as from April, we are actually taking the service forward ourselves. I think the benefits of befriending are evident to anyone. It's been quite sad for us that we haven't really been able to visit our patients for pretty well a year. But again, that is now restarting as we gently ease out of lockdown. Heart Voluntary Action are well known, of course, by us all. They wanted a base for their counselling services, and have taken a lease on the annex, which is a small building in the grounds of Odiham Cottage Hospital, which we completely refurbished and has provided some lovely facilities now, very modern, very calm, and it's been a great success to Heart Voluntary Action, who have provided their one-to-one youth counselling services, but more recently they've added one-to-one adult counselling services. And although a number of those services have continued through lockdown on a telephone or Zoom basis, particularly for children, they find that a face-to-face service is very much preferred. And so very recently that has been resumed. And of course, Sunshine and Showers are the group of people who are kind of more of a self-help group, but they come here twice a week and meet for mutual support through periods of anxiety and depression. So in summary, Odiham Cottage Hospital is a health and wellbeing hub for West Hart. We care for local residents. We are always looking at new services in the health and social care sectors. That is evidenced recently by the trustees' decision to support younger families in our area. And we have started working with canine assisted learning, who take therapy dogs into schools and work with children who are having trouble engaging in education. And that's been a great success. So we've been funding that at infants and junior schools and are looking at moving elsewhere in the patch. And we've also funded Home Start, who again work with young families, to run a early parenting support group in Hook. And although they were supposed to launch in the 1st of April 2020, They have been working with families on a one-to-one through lockdown, but are actually getting the group up and running as we speak. So a whole range of services going on both in the building and out in the field, all funded by the generosity of local people who've made all this possible, and without which we wouldn't be here today. So that's my talk. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take questions.